What you're about to hear cost one woman everything: her home, her name, her place at the table. And it started with a single phone call she should never have answered. On a December evening, a woman named Florence sat on a park bench in a city she didn't know, wearing a coat 3 sizes too big, holding a plastic bag with everything she owned inside it. She had been a wife for 22 years, a mother for 19, a daughter for 45. And now she was none of those things. Every door she had ever walked through was locked. Every name she had ever answered to had been taken back. But across the street from that park bench was a building with a light on in the window. And inside that building was a person Florence had wronged deeply 11 years ago. Going through that door was the last thing Florence wanted to do. But it was the only door left. And what happened inside changed both of their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted. So glad you're here. Before the story starts, please like and subscribe. And one more thing, drop your location in the comments. Are you watching from Chicago, Accra, maybe Montego Bay or Dublin? Let us know. Now listen, I need to tell you about Florence. And I need to tell you what she did 11 years ago before I can tell you what was done to her. Because this story doesn't begin with innocence. It begins with a woman who made a terrible choice, who paid for it in silence, and who only discovered what real mercy looks like when she was sitting on a park bench with nothing left but the plastic bag in her lap and the cold in her bones. Florence Eddings was 45 years old.
She had the kind of face that carried its history plainly. Deep lines across her forehead from years of frowning at problems she couldn't solve. Soft pouches beneath her eyes from decades of broken sleep. And a mouth that turned downward at the corners even when she smiled, as if her face had forgotten how to hold joy without also holding its opposite. She had light brown skin, a narrow nose, and dark hair streaked with gray that she used to dye every 6 weeks, but had stopped dyeing a year ago when the money ran tight. She wore it pulled back in a low ponytail secured with a rubber band. She had thin wrists and strong calves from years of walking. Florence walked everywhere because she never learned to drive and because walking gave her time to think. Though the things she thought about while walking were rarely the things that made her feel better.
She had a small scar above her right eyebrow from walking into a cabinet door when she was 31, and she had a habit of touching it when she was nervous, pressing her fingertip against the raised skin like she was checking to make sure she was still solid, still real, still occupying space in the world. Florence had been a wife. Her husband's name was Derek Eddings. Derek was 48, a long-haul truck driver who was away more than he was home, and who, when he was home, occupied the recliner in the living room like a king occupying a throne he had stopped earning the right to sit in. He was a large man with thick arms and a face that went from pleasant to mean with no warning, the way a sky changes before a storm. He didn't hit Florence. He never hit her. But he had a way of speaking to her that made hitting seem almost preferable, because at least bruises heal and people can see them. The things Derek said left marks that nobody could see, and that Florence could never quite explain to anyone, not even herself. He called her stupid, not in anger, in conversation, casually, the way you'd mention the weather. Florence, you're stupid if you think that's going to work. Don't be stupid, Florence. Why do I even ask you? You're too stupid to understand. He said it so often and so easily that Florence eventually stopped hearing it as an insult and started hearing it as a fact. She carried the word inside her like a stone she swallowed by accident and could never cough back up. They had one child, a son named Terrell. Terrell was 19 now. He was tall like his father, quiet like his mother, with serious eyes and a careful way of moving through rooms, like he was always measuring the distance between himself and the nearest exit. Terrell was a freshman at a state college 3 hours away.
He had left home in August with a duffel bag and a scholarship and a relief so visible it sat on his face like sunlight. He called Florence every Sunday evening. The calls lasted 12 minutes on average. He never called Derek. Florence also had a mother. Bernice Eddings, originally Bernice Hadley, was 68 years old. She was a retired bank teller who lived in a tidy brick house on a tidy street in a tidy neighborhood and who managed every aspect of her life with the precision of a woman who believed that disorder was a moral failing. Bernice had raised Florence and Florence's older brother Martin alone after their father left when Florence was 6. She raised them on rules and structure and the absolute conviction that family reputation was the only currency that mattered. Bernice did not forgive mistakes. She cataloged them. She filed them in a system inside her head and retrieved them at will, decades later, with perfect clarity and no mercy.
She remembered every tardiness, every poor grade, every boyfriend she disapproved of, every decision Florence made that deviated from the path Bernice had drawn. And the biggest deviation, the one Bernice stored in the center of her catalog like a trophy in a case, happened 11 years ago. But what happened next changed everything. 11 years ago, Florence had a sister-in-law named Patricia. Patricia was Martin's wife. She was a warm, generous woman who taught kindergarten and baked banana bread every Saturday, and who treated Florence like a real sister, not just a legal one. Patricia was the only person in the family who made Florence feel like she was allowed to take up space. When Florence walked into a room where Patricia was, she didn't stand in the doorway. She walked in. Patricia had a savings account. She had been saving for years, slowly, patiently, to open a small bakery. It was her dream. She had $7,400 in that account. She showed Florence the balance once, on her phone screen, and her face lit up like a child showing a drawing she was proud of. Florence stole it. She took all of it. She did it because Derek told her to. Derek had gambling debts. He owed money to people who didn't send reminders. They sent consequences. He told Florence that if she didn't find the money, they would come to the house. He told her that Terrell would be home when they came. He told her this calmly, in the same voice he used to call her stupid, and Florence believed him because she had spent 15 years believing everything he said. Patricia had given Florence access to the account years earlier in case of an emergency. Florence transferred the money on a Tuesday afternoon while sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the refrigerator and her hands shaking so badly she had to enter the password 3 times. When Patricia discovered the theft, she didn't scream. She didn't rage. She sat in her kitchen, alone, and called Florence. "Did you take my money?" Patricia asked. Florence was silent for 10 seconds. Then she said, "Yes." Patricia hung up. She never called again. Martin cut Florence off completely. He told Bernice. Bernice added it to her catalog. Center shelf, glass case, perfect lighting. Florence became the daughter who stole from family. Not the daughter who was married to a man who called her stupid. Not the daughter who transferred the money with shaking hands. Not the daughter who was threatened. Just the daughter who stole. Derek paid his debts. He never mentioned it again. The money disappeared into whatever dark hole it came from, and the only person who carried the weight was Florence, who carried it alone, every day, for 11 years, pressing the scar above her eyebrow and swallowing the stone a little deeper. And that was only the beginning. Now let me tell you what happened in December. The December that put Florence on the park bench. Derek left. Not dramatically, not with a fight. He came home from a long-haul run on a Tuesday, parked his rig, walked inside, sat in his recliner, and told Florence he was moving to Nevada with a woman named Charlene he had been seeing for 2 years. 2 years? Florence said. Don't be stupid, Florence, you had to have known. She hadn't known. She hadn't suspected. She hadn't seen a single sign. Because Derek was gone 3 weeks out of every 4, and when he was home, Florence was so busy trying not to be stupid that she didn't have the energy to be suspicious. Derek was on the lease. Florence was not. He gave her 30 days to vacate. He said this while eating a sandwich she had just made him, sitting in the recliner she had just cleaned. He said it the way he said everything, like it was a fact about the weather. Florence called Terrell. Terrell was at school. He had midterms. He shared a dorm room with a roommate. He couldn't take her in. He wired her $100 from his meal plan money. She could hear the guilt in his voice, heavy and sharp, and she told him not to worry, that she would figure something out, even though she had no idea how. She called Martin. Martin's number had been changed. She called Bernice. This was the phone call she should never have answered. Because Bernice did not simply say, no. Bernice said something that entered Florence's chest like a blade wrapped in silk. Florence, you made your choices. You married that man against my wishes. You stole from your brother's wife. You embarrassed this family. And now you want me to clean up the mess? I am 68 years old. I have earned my peace. And my peace does not include a daughter who takes and never learns.
Florence sat on the edge of the bed that would not be hers in 26 more days, and listened to her mother list every failure, every shortcoming, every entry in the catalog, delivered with the precision of a bank teller counting bills. "Don't call this number again," Bernice said. "Not until you have something to offer besides problems." The line went dead. Florence pressed her finger against the scar above her eyebrow. She held it there for a long time. Then she packed a plastic bag with the things that mattered: 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, Terrell's baby photograph, and the small gold cross she wore on a chain around her neck, the one her father gave her before he left, the only thing of his she still had. She walked out of the apartment on a Friday evening in December. The air was cold enough to burn. She had no car. She had no destination.
She had $100 in her pocket and a coat she had taken from the Goodwill donation bin outside the grocery store because her own coat was too thin and the nights were getting longer. She walked for 2 hours. She ended up in a neighborhood she didn't recognize, on a street she had never seen, sitting on a park bench across from a small building with a sign above the door. The sign said, "Sweet Rise Bakery." Florence looked at the sign. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked through the window. Inside, under warm yellow light, a woman was wiping down a counter. She was wearing a white apron. Her hair was shorter than Florence remembered, but her face was the same. The same face that had lit up when she showed Florence a savings account balance on a phone screen 11 years ago. Patricia. Now here is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Florence sat on that bench for 45 minutes.
She watched Patricia move through the bakery, wiping tables, stacking chairs, turning off the display lights one by one. She watched her disappear into the back and come out without the apron, wearing a coat and a scarf. She watched her walk to the front door, keys in hand. Florence could have walked away. She should have walked away. Patricia owed her nothing. Patricia had every right to see Florence on that bench and close the door and lock it and drive home and never think about her again. But Florence was cold and tired, and the stone she had been carrying for 11 years was so heavy she couldn't stand up without feeling like it would pull her through the earth. She stood. She crossed the street. She stood on the sidewalk in front of the bakery, in the Goodwill coat, holding the plastic bag, and she waited for Patricia to see her. Patricia saw her. She stopped with her key in the lock.
She looked at Florence the way you look at a ghost. Not scared, not angry, just stunned that something you had finished grieving could reappear in front of you, solid and real and shivering. "Florence?" Patricia said. "Yes." Patricia looked at the plastic bag. She looked at the oversized coat. She looked at Florence's face, the lines, the gray hair, the downturned mouth, the scar above the eyebrow. She saw everything that 11 years had done to this woman, and she saw it clearly, because Patricia was the kind of person who looked at people the way she looked at baking, with attention, with patience, with the understanding that what you see on the surface is never the whole story. "Are you in trouble?" Patricia asked. Florence's chin trembled. She pressed the scar. "I have nowhere to go." Patricia was quiet for 6 seconds. 6 seconds that contained 11 years of hurt and anger and grief. And the $7,400 that disappeared on a Tuesday afternoon, and the bakery dream that had to start over from zero, and the silence that grew between 2 women who used to be sisters. Then Patricia unlocked the door and pushed it open. "Come inside," she said. "I just took the last batch of rolls out of the oven. They're still warm." Florence walked into the bakery. The air hit her like an embrace. Warm, sweet, thick with the smell of yeast and butter and brown sugar. The floor was tile. The walls were painted a soft cream. There were small round tables with mismatched chairs and a glass display case that was empty now, but still showed the crumb trails of the day's pastries. Behind the counter was a kitchen with stainless steel surfaces and an oven that was still clicking as it cooled. Patricia set a plate of rolls in front of Florence.
They were golden brown, glossy with butter, steam rising from the split tops. Florence picked one up and held it. It was so warm it hurt her cold fingers. She ate it slowly. Then she ate another. Then she pressed her hand against her mouth and cried. Patricia sat across from her. She didn't touch her. She didn't speak. She just sat there and let Florence eat and cry and be a human being in a warm room when every other room in the world had gone cold. When Florence stopped crying, she wiped her face with a paper napkin and looked at Patricia. "I stole from you," Florence said. "I took your dream. I have no right to be sitting here." "No," Patricia said. "You don't." Florence flinched. "But here you are, and here I am. And those rolls aren't going to eat themselves." Florence looked at her. "How can you do this, after what I did?" Patricia folded her hands on the table. "Because I spent 4 years hating you, Florence. 4 years. And then I spent 3 years trying to forget you. And then I spent 4 years building this bakery from nothing, from a second savings account, from weekend markets and church bake sales and $6 loaves of banana bread. And every single day that I kneaded dough and rolled crusts and waited for ovens to heat, I thought about you. Not with anger, with sadness. Because I knew why you did it. I always knew." Florence went still. "You knew about Derek?" "Martin told me after the divorce. He said Derek had debts. He said Derek threatened you. He said you were scared." "Martin told you?" "Martin knew. He always knew. But he was angry and Bernice was louder and it was easier to cut you off than to admit that his sister was being controlled by a man who called her stupid every day." Florence pressed both hands flat on the table. Her fingers were trembling. "Why didn't anyone help me?" Patricia's eyes were wet. "Because we failed you, Florence, all of us. I was so focused on the money that I didn't see the woman who stole it was drowning. And I am sorry for that." Florence stared at her. 11 years of silence. 11 years of the stone in her stomach. 11 years of pressing the scar and swallowing the word stupid and believing she was the villain of her own story. And here was the woman she had wronged, sitting in a bakery she built from the wreckage, saying, "I'm sorry," to her. "I owe you $7,400, Florence whispered. "You owe me nothing. You owed me a lot once, but not anymore, because I am choosing to let it go. Not for you, for me. Because carrying that debt in my heart was heavier than carrying it in my bank account. Stay with us, because what happens next will shock you." Patricia gave Florence a job. She didn't offer it out of pity. She offered it because she needed help. The bakery was growing. Patricia was running it alone, baking, selling, cleaning, ordering supplies, keeping books. She needed a second pair of hands, and Florence had 2. Florence started the next morning. She arrived at 4:30 because Patricia started baking at 5. The bakery was cold and dark, and the ovens hadn't been lit yet, and Florence stood in the doorway with her plastic bag in one hand and the other hand on the frame. "You can put your bag in the office," Patricia said, "and stop standing in the doorway like that. You're letting the cold in." Florence walked in, all the way in. She set the bag down. She tied on an apron. She washed her hands in the big stainless steel sink, and the water was warm, and the soap smelled like lemon. And for one moment, standing at that sink, Florence closed her eyes and breathed, and felt something she hadn't felt in so long, she almost didn't recognize it. She felt useful. Patricia taught her everything. How to measure flour by weight, not volume, because volume lies. How to knead dough until it passes the window test. Stretch it thin enough to see light through. How to proof yeast in water that was exactly 110 degrees, because too cold kills it, and too hot kills it faster. How to score bread with a razor blade in one quick motion, confident, no hesitation, because the bread can feel when you're afraid. "The bread can feel it?" Florence said. "Everything you make carries what you feel when you make it," Patricia said. "If you're angry,
The dough is tough. If you're patient, it rises. That's not science. That's just truth. Florence learned. She was not naturally talented. She overworked the croissant dough the first week and the layers stuck together. She underbaked the banana bread twice. She burned an entire sheet of sugar cookies because she forgot to set the timer. But she showed up every morning at 4:30, and she tied on the apron, and she washed her hands in the warm lemon water, and she tried. But what Florence didn't know yet was that Patricia had reasons beyond kindness for keeping her close. Patricia and Martin had divorced 4 years ago. The marriage didn't survive the bitterness that followed the theft, not because of the money, but because of what the money revealed. Martin handled the situation the way Bernice taught him to handle everything, by cutting, by erasing, by filing it away and closing the drawer. He cut Florence out. Then he cut Patricia's feelings about Florence out. Then, when Patricia wanted to talk about it, to process it, to grieve the sister she lost, Martin told her to stop bringing it up. He said it was done. He said they were done with Florence. But Patricia was not done. Patricia was never done with people. She held on to them the way she held on to sourdough starter, feeding them, keeping them alive, believing they would rise if given time. When the divorce was final, Patricia moved to this city, 3 hours from everyone she knew. And she opened the bakery with nothing but $4,000 in savings and a recipe book she had been filling since she was 22. Every page was handwritten. Every recipe had been tested at least 5 times. On the inside cover, she had written a quote from her grandmother. "When your hands are busy making something good, your heart has less room for what's bad." Patricia's hands had been busy for 4 years, and her heart had made room. Enough room for a woman on a park bench in a coat 3 sizes too big. And just when Florence thought she had found solid ground, the ground cracked. Bernice found out. Of course she did. Martin told her. Martin, who still talked to Patricia occasionally about logistical matters involving their shared property, heard from a mutual acquaintance that Patricia had someone new working at the bakery. He looked at the bakery's social media page and saw, in the background of a photograph of a display case, a woman in an apron wiping a counter. Florence. Martin called Bernice. Bernice called Patricia. Patricia was elbow deep in bread dough when her phone rang. She put it on speaker. Bernice's voice filled the kitchen like cold water. "Is it true that you have Florence working in your bakery?" Patricia kept kneading. "Yes, it's true." "After what she did to you?" "I know what she did to me, Bernice. I was there." "Then you've lost your mind. That woman stole from you. She stole your dream." "She stole money. The dream is standing right here with flour on the ceiling and a line out the door on Saturdays. The dream survived." "I will not allow—" "Bernice." Patricia's hands stopped. She looked at the phone. "You are not in charge of this bakery. You are not in charge of my decisions. And with respect, you were never in charge of Florence either. You were just louder than everyone else." The line went silent. Then Bernice said, in a voice that could frost glass, "If you keep that woman, you are choosing her over this family." "Then I'm choosing her, because somebody should have chosen her a long time ago." Bernice hung up. Patricia went back to kneading. The dough was smooth and elastic. It had risen perfectly. Florence was in the supply closet. She had heard everything. She was sitting on an upturned bucket, her hand on the scar above her eyebrow, tears running silently down her face. She was not crying because of what Bernice said. She was crying because of what Patricia said. Somebody should have chosen her a long time ago. Nobody had ever said that about Florence. Nobody. Not once in 45 years. Now let me tell you what happened after the phone call. Bernice did not speak to Patricia again. Martin did not call. The silence from the Eddings family was total and complete, like a door slamming in a soundproofed room. But Florence was not alone anymore, and that changed everything. Patricia let Florence sleep in the small studio apartment above the bakery. It was one room with a kitchenette, a bathroom, a single bed, and a window that looked down at the street. It smelled like bread because the ovens were directly below, and the heat rose through the floor. Florence lay in that bed at night and felt the warmth through the mattress, and thought it was the kindest thing a floor had ever done. She worked 6 days a week. She got better. The banana bread stopped burning. The croissant layers separated. The cookies came out golden. She learned to score bread with a razor in one quick motion, no hesitation. And the first time she did it perfectly, Patricia looked at the loaf and nodded. "There she is," Patricia said. "There who is?" "The woman underneath all that noise. She's been in there the whole time." Florence looked at the bread. The score was clean. The crust was cracking along the line exactly the way it was supposed to. She had made something. With her hands. Something that was good. She touched the scar above her eyebrow. But this time she wasn't checking to see if she was real. She was just touching a part of herself. A part that had a history. A part that wasn't a flaw. 3 months in, the bakery had its best month ever. Patricia and Florence worked side by side from 5 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, moving around each other in the small kitchen with the efficiency of 2 people who had learned each other's rhythms. When to step left, when to hand over the spatula, when to stay silent, and when to talk. They had not been this close since before the theft. They had never been this close. Because before the theft, they were sisters-in-law. Now they were something else. Something forged in flour and warm water, and the particular alchemy of 2 women rebuilding something that had been broken by a man who called one of them stupid, and a family that called the other one unforgivable. But the real shock was still coming. Terrell came for spring break. He took a bus 3 hours to see his mother. He walked into the bakery at 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday. The shop was full, every table occupied, a line at the counter. The smell of cinnamon rolls, Florence's recipe, one she had invented herself with orange zest in the glaze, filled the room. Terrell stood in the doorway. He was tall, quiet, with his father's build but not his father's eyes. Terrell had Florence's eyes, the deep ones, the careful ones, the ones that measured the distance to the nearest exit. He saw his mother behind the counter. She was wearing the white apron. Her hair was in a ponytail. Her sleeves were rolled up. There was flour on her forearms. She was handing a bag of rolls to a customer and saying, "Thank you, sweetie. Come back Tuesday. That's when the sourdough is fresh." Terrell watched her. He had never seen his mother like this. Not once. Not in 19 years. He had seen her sitting on the couch while Derek occupied the recliner. He had seen her washing dishes at 10 o'clock at night. He had seen her pressing the scar above her eyebrow and staring at walls. He had never seen her standing behind a counter, sleeves rolled up, telling a stranger to come back on Tuesday. He walked in. Florence saw him and stopped mid-sentence. Her hand went to the scar. Then it dropped. She came around the counter and hugged her son so hard the flour on her apron transferred to his jacket in a white bloom across his chest. "Mama," Terrell said, "you smell like bread." "I know, baby." She was laughing and crying at the same time. "I smell like bread every day now." Terrell stayed for the week. He slept on the floor of the studio apartment on an air mattress that slowly deflated overnight, so that by 4 in the morning he was essentially sleeping on tile. He did not complain once. He helped in the bakery. He carried trays. He washed dishes. He swept the floor. Patricia put him in charge of the display case, and he arranged the pastries with the precision of a young man who had inherited his mother's need for things to be in the right place. On his last evening, Terrell and Florence sat at one of the small round tables after the bakery had closed. The display case was empty. The ovens were cooling. The lights were low. Patricia had gone upstairs to give them space. "Mama, I need to tell you something," Terrell said. Florence pressed her hands flat on the table. "What is it?" "I called Grandma." Florence went still. "I called her last week. I told her where you were. I told her about the bakery. I told her you were working and you had a place to live and you were okay." Florence's throat tightened. "What did she say?" Terrell looked at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. "She said she was glad you were okay. She said it fast, like she didn't want the words to stay in her mouth too long. And then she said, 'Well, I hope she's learned something.' And I said, 'Mama, I hope this is okay.' I said, 'The only person who hasn't learned anything, Grandma, is you.'" Florence stared at her son. You said that to Bernice? Yes, ma'am. Terrell, that woman raised me. You can't talk to her like, Mama. Terrell leaned forward. His eyes, her eyes, were steady and clear. She raised you to believe you were a problem. She raised you to think that love comes with receipts. She raised you to carry a stone so heavy you couldn't stand up straight. That is not raising. That is burying. Florence's breath caught. She pressed the scar. But Terrell reached across the table and gently took her hand away from it. Stop doing that, he said softly. You don't need to check anymore, Mama. You're here. You're real. And you're not stupid. You never were. Florence heard that word, stupid. And for the first time in 22 years, she felt it leave her body.
Not like a stone being coughed up, like a door being opened, like something that had been locked inside a room for so long that when the air finally hit it, it simply dissolved. She held her son's hand. She held it the way you hold something you built without knowing you were building it. A boy who took a bus 3 hours to see his mother, who slept on a deflating air mattress without complaining, who called his grandmother and said the truth, who reached across a table and stopped a habit that had lasted 30 years. When did you get so brave? Florence whispered. Terrell smiled. Her smile. The one that turns down at the corners but lights up everywhere else. I watched you walk out of that apartment with a plastic bag, Mama. And you were scared. And you went anyway. I learned it from you. Now let me tell you how this story rests. Summer came. The bakery expanded. Patricia knocked through a wall into the adjoining storefront that had been vacant for 2 years. She and Florence painted the new space themselves. Cream walls, white trim. Daniel from the hardware store donated a set of shelves. The church around the corner brought tables. A local artist painted a mural on one wall, a field of wheat with a single loaf of bread rising from the center like a sun. Florence developed 3 signature items: the orange zest cinnamon rolls, a brown butter shortbread that crumbled perfectly on the first bite, and a sourdough loaf scored with a pattern of leaves, not because Patricia taught her the pattern, but because Florence had started inventing her own designs, drawing them on scrap paper at the kitchen table, before transferring them to dough with the razor blade in one clean motion. Patricia made Florence a partner, not an employee, a partner. She had the papers drawn up by a lawyer and she presented them to Florence on a Tuesday morning before the ovens were lit in the cold, dark kitchen that smelled like yeast and possibility. 50-50, Patricia said. Equal. Florence looked at the papers. I can't accept this. I still owe you. The debt is paid, Florence. You paid it every morning at 4:30 for 6 months. You paid it with your hands, with your time, with cinnamon rolls that have a line around the block. We are even. We are more than even. We are partners. Florence signed the papers. Her hand was steady. The pen didn't shake. They renamed the bakery, not Sweet Rise. They called it Second Rise. Because in baking, the second rise is where the magic happens. The first rise builds structure. The second rise builds flavor. You can't skip it. You can't rush it. You have to let the dough rest and come back and trust that it will rise again. The sign went up on a Saturday. Florence and Patricia stood on the sidewalk and looked at it. Second Rise Bakery. Gold letters on a cream background. Below the name, in smaller letters, a line that Patricia insisted on. Everyone deserves another chance to rise. Bernice never came to the bakery. She never called. The catalog in her head remained open. The entries preserved. The glass case polished. Florence stopped waiting for her mother to close it. Some doors stay locked, and learning to stop knocking is its own kind of freedom. But Martin came. 8 months after the bakery expanded, on a Wednesday afternoon, a man walked through the door and stood in line behind a woman buying a sourdough loaf. Florence was at the register. She looked up and saw her brother. Martin was 50, heavier than she remembered, with their mother's narrow face and their father's restless hands. He was holding a small paper bag. Florence's hand went to the scar. Then she dropped it. "Martin," she said. "Florence." He set the paper bag on the counter. "It's banana bread. I made it myself. It's terrible. But I thought..."
I thought maybe you could show me what I did wrong." Florence looked at the bag. She looked at her brother. She looked at the line of customers behind him. Then she came around the counter, took the bag and said, "Come into the kitchen, but wash your hands first. Patricia has rules." Martin washed his hands. He stood at the stainless steel counter and watched Florence slice his banana bread and taste it and nod. "Too much sugar," she said. "And you overmixed the batter. That's why it's dense. Can you fix it?" "I can teach you to fix it yourself." Martin looked at his sister. His eyes were wet. "I should have called," he said. "Years ago. I should have picked up the phone." "Yes, you should have." "I was angry." "I know. I'm not angry anymore." Florence handed him a bowl and a whisk. "Then we start from here. First lesson. Crack the eggs one at a time. If you crack them all at once, you can't find the shell." Martin cracked the first egg. He got shell in the batter. Florence fished it out with her fingernail, the way Patricia taught her, quick and precise. "See?" Florence said. "One at a time." Martin cracked the second egg. Clean. No shell. "There you go," Florence said, and she smiled. The downturned smile that lit up everywhere else. That December, exactly 1 year after the park bench, Florence was closing the bakery alone. It was 9 o'clock at night. The ovens were off. The display case was clean. The chairs were stacked. She was wiping down the last table when she stopped and looked around. The mural on the wall. The cream paint she had rolled with her own hands. The shelves lined with tomorrow's bread, wrapped and labeled in her handwriting. The small gold cross around her neck catching the light from the single bulb above the counter. She sat down in one of the chairs. She didn't press the scar. She pressed her palm flat on the table instead, feeling the surface, solid and real and warm from the ovens below. Terrell had called that evening. The call lasted 42 minutes. He told her about his classes. He told her about a girl he was seeing. He told her he was proud of her. He said those exact words. "I'm proud of you, Mama." And Florence held the phone against her ear and listened to her son say the sentence she had waited her whole life to hear. And she let it settle inside her in the space where the stone used to be. The bakery was quiet. The street was dark. Upstairs, the studio apartment was warm from the ovens, and the bed was made, and the window looked down at a sidewalk where, 1 year ago, a woman in an oversized coat had stood shivering with a plastic bag, deciding whether to knock on the only door left. She knocked, and the door opened, and behind it was bread and warmth, and a woman who had every reason to say no, and said, "Come inside instead." Florence turned off the light. She locked the front door. She touched the glass where the gold letters caught the streetlight. Second rise. She whispered it to herself, not as a name, as a promise. Then she walked upstairs, lay down in the bed that smelled like bread, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Florence Eddings fell asleep without pressing the scar, without swallowing the stone, without measuring the distance to the nearest exit. She just closed her eyes, and rested, and rose. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with a friend. Drop a comment and tell us what part hit you the hardest. We'll see you in the next one.